So, have you seen we have a good representation of a European country with an additional country from overseas, beautiful country that is Mexico. So, this is the right place to talk about the trend of the M&A market, what's happening in the last couple of years, and which are the expectations for the future. Thinking to Italy, I can say that we had, first of all, last year a wonderful period full of deals. This year is still well. Frankly speaking, not as last year. I think that we are 10% less. Of course, we have a lot of foreign investors interested to Italian company, also because a lot of Italian companies are family companies. So and in a lot of cases, the activity is in some niche sectors, but very interesting for private equity to develop and to grow. And so a lot of private equity are coming in Italy. First of all from UK, but our investors are also from US, and then the other two countries are Germany and France. From China, that we started some years ago thinking that all Chinese are coming in Italy to invest. At the end of the day, we didn't see a lot of Chinese to invest in Italy. A couple of very big deals, but that's all. And finally, in terms of sector, the big sector where we have seen investment has been TMT, and then industrial, because Italy, after Germany, is the second manufacturing country in Europe, and chemical. This is more or less the current scenario for the future. I think that the market will still very active, even if not as in the last couple of years. Say this about Italy, maybe I already talked a lot. I will pass the word starting from Sofia.
Okay, thank you so much, Maximo. Is it working? Yes. So in Portugal, and March 2020 was quite a surprise for everyone. And in terms of deals, the M&A deals, it was quite uncertain to what extent the pandemic would affect the ongoing transactions. So the question was regarding ongoing transactions, would they stop or would we go for virtual closings, for instance? So we saw several cases where the transactions, they were, of course, the pace slowed down, but at the end we performed the due diligence online, the closing was online, and well, with all the restrictions that were going on, we were able to have the deals concluded. Of course, that we saw investors opting to hold the deals, to hold the transactions, and expecting just let's put this on hold and wait to see what will happen. And 2021, it was again, I think the numbers, the figures, they talked. And what we saw was that not only, well, in terms of the number of deals, the figures, they were not like the pre-pandemic figures, but at least in terms of values, the deals were quite material. So I think now for 2022, we do have on the pipeline, there are not only deals on the pipeline, but also there is this recovery and resilient program that the government is preparing with the EU funds, which is giving a lot of enthusiastic movements into investors and in Portugal. as for, I would say, in terms of trends that we saw in the last years, I would say that we saw clients focused on the core businesses, meaning we have assisted clients with the carve out of the non-core activities. For instance, let me give you an example. In the pharmaceutical sector, we saw clients carving out generic business from the non-generic business, focusing on what was the demand at that time. Again, in terms of infrastructures, we saw in the recent years, we saw these infrastructure funds, infrastructure companies looking to acquire the infrastructures of telecommunications companies. So it is now a trend in Portugal to have the telecos carving out these business units and having them being transferred to infrastructure funds. And finally, also, I think the pandemic also brought to the attention of the big multinational companies that they should try to, in terms of reduce costs and look for synergies in the supply chain, to go for joint venture investments in terms of the non-core activities in order to reduce the outsourcing costs. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Nikolai?
Yeah, so it doesn't come as a surprise. Also, at the outset of the pandemic, investors reassessed their portfolios. Of course, like everyone, there was a lot of uncertainty. So, time to evaluate. But it picked up fairly quickly again, I would say. I think then the pandemic, it exacerbated the need to digitize, which permeated, I think, a whole lot of sectors. So we saw a lot of activity also in the life sciences sector and in ICT generally. Perhaps, to exemplify one of these trends was also SPAC transactions. So also Switzerland, we were able to advise on a couple of deals on that topic. So one was for Zegna, for the fashion brand, and the other one, which is also related to the life sciences sector, was MoonLake Immunotherapeutics, so a biopharmaceutical company. It was a startup, so it was just incorporated 2021, and a US NASDAQ SPAC came and found the target, they closed the deal only 1 year after its incorporation and raised 230 million. But that's also a sign of the favorable financing conditions, of course, that were available. So very cheap financing, and I think that was a good way also for startups to exit and for corporate buyers alike to expand their footprint. Then perhaps another particular area of interest, again, was ICT as well. And particularly recently, we have also seen clean tech investments. There has been just last month, I think, one of the largest ever financings in Switzerland of 650 million of a clean tech company called Climeworks. They have a technology that captures carbon. I think that also relates to the increased interest in ESG topics, which we will also talk about a bit more later. And then I think overall the situation is still very favorable. At least in Switzerland, I think it's a little bit the exception. Inflation is still very low as well. Given the current political environment with war and after pandemic and so on, I think if it permits, it's only a matter of time that it will also affect the Swiss market. But so far, the outlook, I think, remains pretty positive, at least in the technology sectors, I would say.
Well, thank you, Nikolai. Sean, maybe talking about your country, you can tell us also something about some effect related to the Brexit, if you have some influence from the Brexit.
Yeah, it might take a longer session.
We give 1 minute more than the other. 1 minute, eh?
So yeah, thank you. Like everyone so far, the market sentiment in Ireland is very positive. There's been a strong response after the pandemic. We had a strong 15% growth in GDP last year. It looks strong for this year, although obviously with everything that's happened, those expectations will be cut back somewhat. But as I say, for M&A transactions, the market sentiment is positive. 2021 was a record year. Whatever sources of data you look at, they differ, but it was a record year for M&A transactions. Funding is readily available, and I know we'll touch on that later on. Competition for assets at the moment is fierce, and cross-border deals are at an unprecedented level. Corporates, I suppose, after the pandemic, they're looking for strategic deals, strategic acquisitions, consolidation, and that's all fed into to a very, very buoyant market. What's up? TMT, financial services. There was a couple of headline deals in aircraft financing because Ireland is the global centre for aircraft financing, aircraft leasing, and they actually pushed the figures up quite significantly. Renewables, most sectors other than perhaps construction, transport, and hotel and leisure, although we did probably the largest PE deal in hotel and leisure last year with Fortress, but generally hotel and leisure has struggled. The majority of the deals are mid-market, the 5 million to 250 million space in those areas. I suppose the other thing to say is inbound has been very, very strong. Cross-border has been very, very strong. Where does it come from? Traditionally, the United States would be the largest source of inbound deals, followed by the UK. But there are many European countries. You'd see a lot of private equity as well, particularly in certain areas. For instance, in the whole healthcare and nursing home space, there's been a lot of interest and investment from France and Germany. Brexit. God, it's been with us for quite a while. The vote was in 2016. There was an initial, I suppose, pessimism in the market. But because, I suppose, the global market has been so buoyant, there hasn't really been a huge amount of negative impact, although there are challenges. There are transport challenges, but I suppose there's also that whole degree of uncertainty because it hasn't been concluded, or rather, I suppose, it has been concluded and reopened, and obviously they're still negotiating. It hasn't had an impact, obviously, on domestic deals. If you have a domestic buyer, domestic seller with little exposure to the UK market, it hasn't had a significant impact. Interestingly, and maybe this is because the EU, we've implemented the rules, whereas the UK has had longer transition periods. The level of imports from Britain has increased, but it's no longer our largest trading partner. The level of exports out have decreased. But interestingly, there's been a huge explosion in the level of activity between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, where I think just supply chain sources have changed because Northern Ireland is in a quite positive space. It remains part of the European Union effectively, or part of the single market rather, while remaining part of the United Kingdom. There has also been opportunities for Ireland, opportunities for countries across the EU, where companies previously based in the UK seeking a foothold in the European Union have relocated to Ireland. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Christine, what about France?
So nothing that different, just what we said. The only thing is that our market, even if the cross-border activity was quite dynamic, the first investors in France, I mean, on a general point of view, are still the American investors, and the first European investors in France are the German ones. So nothing has changed so far. But the two last years were marked by the huge domestic deals. The takeover of Suez by Veolia, which is quite atypical. It was considered in 2020 as the deal of the year because of its volume. The value was 22 billion euros. And it was a quite hostile environment, and a lot of players were part of this game, because even private equity funds, even small ones, were just crazy about this deal. And this move is still going on because of the takeover of Lagardère by Vivendi, and by coincidence, the shareholders of Lagardère has until tonight, which is the deadline, to share their sale if they want to Vivendi. So this is for the past. For the future, I would say it's quite complicated to know, because we were quite concerned about the COVID, but after 1 or 2 months, we realized that it would not change that much. It was like Russian mountains. We were waiting for the vaccine. We had the vaccine, and business was going on. The difficulty now is that we are facing, of course, the war in Ukraine, which is something incredible, and mixed with the policy of zero COVID in Asia, which is another issue. And together, because in France we like to mix all problems together, our election. So we were very concerned this year, which was the first time we had to be in a position to choose between the current president. He was elected the second time, which never happened in our history. And usually, in this kind of situation, we have what we call the Republican Front against the extreme right. And it was quite weak this year, I would say. Everybody was very concerned. And now we are in a situation which is still atypical, because when you elect a president in France, a few years later, the members of parliament are elected, and usually it's the party of the president. The president can run the country. And things have changed, because we have 3 blocks. Again, it had never happened. Extreme right, extreme left, and the party of the president. So we don't know exactly. It's the first time as well that we have 6 weeks between the election of the president and the member of the parliament. And to be honest, investors, clients are very concerned. They're waiting in order to see what's going to happen and how this country can be run in the future. So this is where we are. We cross the fingers, but until now, so good so far. But a lot of uncertainty for this year and the year after.
Well, thank you. Debbie?
So in addition to COVID-19, which obviously posed a lot of challenges in our lives, let alone M&A as we're here right now, in Mexico, we pretty much lived through this at the same time that we have a change of government when the current president and its administration took position. So, and you didn't hear this from me, but this change of administration is unlike anything we've ever seen in Mexico before. And in addition to the typical political uncertainty any change of government always brings, I guess it was much more noticeable in Mexico because the policies that this new government issued to address the pandemic were not very well received, and there was little to none financial support or incentives for the private sector. But nevertheless, 2021 was a big surprise for us in M&A transactions, considering what we had been through the previous years. A great factor that's actually impacting the M&A right now in Mexico, it's a lot of changes in the law, specifically in the energy sector, because of this new government's approach, which is more state-oriented. So this has had a lot of impact in our M&A. We've also had this recent labor bill that was passed, which basically prohibits insourcing and very strongly regulates subcontracting in Mexico, that resulted in a lot of corporate reorganizations. The pandemic, of course, has also pushed and incentivized digitalization of business. We're still a little bit behind on that in Mexico, but we're on it. And as far as key sectors, I mean, of course, the technological sector, the financial sector, the health sector was, they grew a lot during this last couple of years. The hospitality sector had a good rebound last year. And but at the end, Mexico is still a manufacturing country, right? So, and as you see the global supply chain crisis, as you see the situation with the war in Ukraine and with China, we're anticipating an increase in M&A activity because as Mexico's role as a nearshoring country increases, so we're anticipating a little bit of M&A because of that also. So I guess that's where we are.
Thank you, Rebbe. Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. Well, quite comparable picture with the other countries. In the Netherlands, after this complete freeze in March, April 20, it picked up, and basically 20 was a good year despite COVID. And 21 was an excellent year with plus 50% in deals in the entire market and in our firm as well. Low interest helped, in particular, private equity to ramp up in the market tremendously. They're very active. It's a very well-developed market in the Netherlands. And a low interest, the lowest unemployment rate ever, lowest number of bankruptcies ever, partly due to state support, COVID state support, creating a lot of zombie companies. So Alice is warming up for a lot of work. Also under new regulations, which basically introduced this Chapter 11 regulations in the Netherlands as well to avoid bankruptcies. But lots of IPOs in the Netherlands, some SPACs as well. We were involved in one, in an acquisition by a SPAC, which actually failed. And that's one of the problems with the SPACs. It's a bag full of raised money listed in order to find a company and merge with that. And not many can actually find good targets. And that's basically the setting of our market. It's a real seller's market with very few good Class A target companies, lots of potential investors. So valuations are soaring, and there's this really seller's market putting pressure on M&A transactions in terms of throughput time, deal certainty, favorable terms for sellers at this point in time. So it's a real frenzy, especially in certain sectors like IT, which we as a firm serve pretty well due to our cooperation with our IT department, which is well established in the Netherlands, and healthcare as well. The same applies to that. And e-health, a combination of tech and health, is popular as well. Clean tech deals, we've done some in that field as well, and sustainable energy deals, hydrogen transactions, which are still debatable whether it will soar or not. And in general, services, the Netherlands is a real services country, and some industrial transactions, but leisure, the hotel business, retail have not done well in this period. And looking forward, currently we're still on a very high level, and investment bankers, corporate finance advisors say that our pipeline, which is our future pipeline as well, are pretty filled on a slightly lower level. But the question is, will it come to an end abruptly or not? At least we foresee a focus on establishing security in supply chains, in maybe nearshoring as well, and more emphasis on national interests and avoiding risk of Chinese support for your production processes. So nearshoring may be a trend that picks up later on. And from a documentation point of view, we expect an even larger gap in valuation perspective going forward. So earnouts will occur more often, in our view, as well, just to build to bridge that gap once the market turns down. So very challenging times ahead, but for now everybody just does like nothing will change and continues to run as ever. So hopefully that will continue from our perspective.
Okay, thank you. Starting from your last comment, we are seeing a general overview of the market, but thinking to the M&A market, of course we have different role played by private equity and private company. I mean, private equity is the goal to invest and to make a profit maybe in a shorter term compared to a private company investors. No? So also with a deal we have we can have a different approach and so on. If I think to Italy, we have last year we had 50% of a deal as done as closed by private equity. Also consider that a lot of deal the party was private equity versus private equity. This is mean that the value each time increase. Personally, I think, but they are creating a bubble or not, no? Because this is at the end of the day can be very risky. But say this and thinking to the approach of these two players. Debbie, in your point of view, in your country, thinking to the private company, how are the challenge, the approach of this company? What do you mean?
Yeah, well, private equity is really strong in Mexico. It's been for a couple of years and more. I mean, way more than that, and it continues to grow and remains there. And what we have in Mexico is we have a lot of family businesses, right? So, for example, in public M&A transaction, of course, everything is strongly regulated, highly scrutinized, and that doesn't make it easier, but it's not the same in private M&A deals, especially when you have non-institutionalized companies or family business. I mean, you have to start basically from scratch, negotiating everything on the basis of the regulatory framework that is available for private companies that in Mexico is not that much, right? So when you're dealing with family businesses and you're starting to negotiate price, what's gonna be the evaluation mechanism for the company? Are you gonna have a post-closing purchase price adjustment, negotiating reps and indemnities and even non-compete clauses? This becomes a really time-consuming task and educational process for the sellers, right? If they don't have an M&A department, they don't have external advisor and this sort of transactions. Due diligence processes always are very time consuming also, and in Mexico it happens a lot that the companies do not have the information available or even in an electronic format. So, I mean, even though we're going through, the pandemic has pushed all of us to implement technological tools. This in Mexico is still very rudimentary. So, we've seen deals where you ask a company for a permit that it's essential for operations, and the response is basically like, the dog ate my homework, excuse, right? Like, we had it, but it's really old, and if you want a copy, you could go to the governmental agency, but guess what? There was a fire, and they don't have it anymore. And so there was a flood, and they don't have it anymore. And it actually turns out to be true. You go to the governmental agency, they don't have it anymore. There was a flood, there was a fire. So you have to live with the reps and guarantees that they give you and the indemnities that they give you. And at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that the person that's gathering the information for the due diligence in a family business is not their only job, right? They still have to run the company and operate the company. So maybe gathering that and getting that data site constructed is not at the top of their mind and list of priorities, right? We also have these challenges in Mexico. I mean, I don't know in Europe, maybe you can give a little bit of insight on that, but at least in the US, we hear a lot about reps and warranties insurance. That's not attractive in Mexico. I don't even know if there are insurance companies in Mexico that offer this type of products. I mean, it's really not available, so we don't have that as far as the escrow mechanism go in Mexico. It's not your 2-pager escrow agreement as you get it in the US. You have to set up a trust, which in Mexico can only be done with financial institutions, which means going through this thorough know your customer process, and the banks and financial institutions are not really responsive, and you end up negotiating a 30-pager trust, which 15 pages being like boilerplate provisions for the trustee. So of course it's a lot of time, a lot of transactional cost. I mean, everything just gets more and more complicated, right? So I guess for me, due diligence, risk allocation, and these kind of protections are really challenging for family business and private companies trying to get into an M&A deal in Mexico.
Okay, thanks. And Steven, thinking on the private equity side, I suppose that also about the private company in Netherlands is not the same, but thinking.
No, but and I think almost all mid-market deals are non-listed private companies, a large percentage being family businesses sold off. And many of those deals are well, it's either a strategic buyer who wants to expand, but many of these deals are private equity driven, either as a platform transaction or a add-on transaction. And unlike in Mexico, our W&I practice apparently is more developed. It used to be available for large deals only, but currently you can even insure smaller deals or small deals with a deal value of 8 million or so for just 100,000 euros. And that's used on a very broad scale because it's a nice instrument to allocate risks in particular with family businesses and the risk perception of selling shareholders. It's taken away by means of so-called zero recourse W&I insurance, where the entire risk will be either insured or for the account of private equity investors mostly. I think the insurance business is trying to bulk up and build more presence so that their terms of accepting used to be quite loose, but currently they realize that they take in quite a lot of risk and trying to sharpen the conditions under which insurance is taken out, which puts a lot of emphasis on due diligence. And that's a stretch. On the one hand, deal speed, the speed of execution is very important. On the other hand, a thorough due diligence and a good due diligence report, not only on legal but also finance, how strong are the earnings, that's important for insurers as well, which needs to be reviewed by the insurer, and it all takes time, so that's something private equity needs to deal with in order to capture those deals in this competitive market at this point in time. And typically discussions focus on data protection, cybersecurity, privacy, the more structural and vague topics which may be carved out from insurances. So that's a typical W&I due diligence item as well. Private equity is very active in the Netherlands and uses W&I a lot in particular.
Okay. What about Ireland, Sean?
Private equity. I think, Stephen, you used the word frenzy, and it could probably describe private equity in Ireland. Traditionally, the main source of acquisition financing was bank debt, but over the last 10 years, private equity has emerged quite strongly, very strongly in the initial days because there were very attractive valuations, but that situation is changing and probably changing dramatically. It's been across all sectors. As I said, it's mostly US, followed by the UK, more and more so European, and maybe in real estate you see Asian funds. Like both Debbie and Stephen said, it has led to some differences in the legal process and documentation. So, for example, our transaction documents, there's a more US deal term influence in them as a consequence. And as you mentioned, warranty and indemnity insurance is something that's more prevalent. I'd reiterate everything Stephen just said there. It's popular, obviously, as funds won't give warranties on an exit, they demand it, and so therefore it is spread throughout the market. Sellers are usually, particularly in family businesses, reluctant to pay the premium. They're mostly buy-side policies, but either a seller or a buyer cost, and the premium would rarely exceed 1%. There's been a bit of hardening of availability over the last 6 or 8 months, and I think that's just purely because it's been so popular. The insurance companies are being a bit more choosy in what risk they take on, but you have an extra advisor on board, it prolongs the due diligence process. Escrow has traditionally, retention and escrow has been there, and the lawyers have done the escrow. We haven't really had a third-party escrow market, but that's fast changing because with increased regulation and negative interest, law firms are just slow to take on that escrow or retention. But as I say, private equity, they're chasing deals. There's plenty of money there. Interesting, it's in both the large deals and in the mid-market space. Interestingly, after COVID, a lot of family businesses probably looked at what they had just gone through COVID and decided to take some money off the table and use private equity as an instrument to do that. So yeah, I suppose going forward, you just wonder where the valuations will go because they're very robust at the moment. But if you could predict the future.
Okay, thank you. Another point, yesterday we assisted at a panel talking about ESG. I think that also ESG is becoming more and more important on the M&A point of view. What do you think, Christine?
I think that's, we're used to saying that we are a bit behind in Europe versus the US, which is not exactly the same, the case, because the SDG issue started, I would say, in 2018 with the non-financial reporting directive, which implies that for all companies having more than, or at least more than 500 employees, to disclose all matters which may have impact on human rights, on your environment, and on social, activity. This was supposed to be completed by the non-financial reporting disclosure in 2021, which focused more on environmental issues and gave more criteria in order to define what has to be taken into account. And the December 2019, again, focusing on environmental issues, what we call the European Green Deal, and which was transcribed in almost all the countries in Europe until now. So we are it's a very sensitive issue. More and more as well in private companies which are not supposed to comply, and we do not comply with those criteria. They decide to put in place some specific policies. It's quite complicated to know if it's only for marketing issue or it's because it's very important for them, but the move is on. And I would say that we have the feeling that all European countries are aligned on those topics.
Same in Switzerland.
Yeah, so I would say it's pretty similar. It's actually in Switzerland, as of next year, there will be new regulation entering into force, where I think the thresholds are very much based on the European directives, not surprisingly. So it's for large caps and financial institutions as well. As you probably know, the financial sector being also very important in Switzerland. So they will have to issue reports on non-financial matters, including ESG topics, including CO2 reduction targets and what they do, social and labor issues, and human rights topics. And additionally, if you treat conflict minerals, you have to also speak to that in the reporting, or if there is founded suspicion of child labor. So large caps will have to report on that, and I think this will have a spillover effect also on SMEs, because if they then acquire targets, they will of course also have to report on their supply chain. So I think it's a matter of time that this becomes more and more a focus.
Does it change your due diligence process, your focus in due diligence as well?
I mean, so far, no. But I think we'll see that the latest beginning of next year.
Yeah. In Italy, about this, in Italy, some companies started to fix some goal to the management for the bonus. I mean, part of the bonus is related to the result of, let me say, the level of green that the companies achieve or other things related to ESG. So we have more than one company that has started to do this. Well, another point is about what the antitrust authority are doing relating to the foreign investment in the country. Thinking to Italy, for instance, we have something called so-called golden power. That means that when we have a foreign investors that invest in a strategic field as, for instance, transport, communication, and so on, we are obliged to notify to Ministry of Economy before to close the deal, explaining everything, and at the end of the day, the Ministry of Economy can say, no, I don't accept. Some months ago, it's been an important issue because Chinese investors 3 years ago is bought a company involved in aviation sector, a small company, without send the notice, and the ministry started with a procedure to revocate the deal with the penalty and so on. So it's becoming more and more important. In France, Christine, you have something, I think that you have more or less the same.
Yeah, the regime has kept strengthening in 2021, and now the control is covering certain technology used in the renewable energy and biotechnologies as well. So when we are, we have a new acquisition, we are very careful about this, this aspect, and we have always to update what is covered, not covered, because it's becoming a bit tricky. Maybe you remember that our Prime Minister in last year impeded one of a transaction. It was the the acquisition of Carrefour by this Canadian group Couche-Tard, and it was quite a surprise. There were a lot of debates in France in that respect. I think that our Canadian friends were not that happy about the situation because they didn't have any choice then to withdraw the offer, because it was one of the first time that our ministry said that certain food or beverage or distribution of food or beverage was considered as a sensitive, industry in France. So that happened last year. We'll see, but it seems that we try to cover more and more and to protect more and more our technologies. And we have to keep to be updated on the situation because the consequences are maybe huge for our clients and for ourselves.
Netherlands, Steven?
Well, competition-wise, we see a tendency that competition authorities look more stringent to deals, in particular tech deals and platform transactions, IT platforms. Also in the Netherlands, we already had some regulation requiring approval of the Minister of Economic Affairs for transactions in the gas sector, infrastructure, energy related as well. Nuclear energy all require approval of the minister, but there is this act in construction, and probably it will adopt it end of this year, which would require approval of this minister in case of transactions that may impact the national security, and that may also cover IT, healthcare, pharmaceutical business, sustainable energy. But it's still under construction, but it all fits the national focus that may be going on globally.
Okay, and in Switzerland, Nikolai?
Yeah, so Switzerland has been very liberal with foreign investors and investments, only controls in the critical infrastructures and financial sector and residential real estate. But there has been some political backlash too, by Chinese acquisitions and so on. So now there is something in the pipeline that's in Parliament. But I think what I've seen so far is that it will remain still pretty liberal. So there will be a review if there is a close state, so a party being close to its government or government itself. There will be a preliminary review, or if it's a distortion to competition, because also the merger control thresholds are fairly high, so they will step up this a little bit, and then ultimate decision power will be with the Federal Council. But the details are not yet fully clear, but again, I think it probably will remain pretty liberal.
Okay. Well, start talking about M&A. I think that we cannot avoid to talk also about tax, because the tax is always an important issue also in the M&A activity. Thinking to Italy, in the last period we have a little problem because the tax authority started to don't accept the interest, the deductibility of the interest in case of leverage when the entrepreneur reinvest with the private equity. Okay, so in that case, they consider that the interest of the loan that usually is done during for the purchase are not recognized. So this could be a problem. In Portugal, what do we have something like this, something different?
Yeah, we have a lot in Portugal. When talking with the Portuguese tax authorities, have quite an imagination. But let's just go back to the trend on the warranty and indemnity insurance in the M&A transaction. So that also triggers tax challenges. And why is that? Because we have seen those warranty and indemnities insurances that cover tax contingencies. They cover, and sometimes the insurance companies, they accept to cover tax contingencies. So in those cases, the challenge has been at the due diligence level to make sure that we assess not only the historical, but also ongoing and future tax risks. But also at the end, at the SPA level, while negotiating, make sure that the tax findings, at least the red flags, they are duly reflected in the SPA, and of course, when negotiating the insurance policy, to make sure that those are not excluded by the insurance company in the documentation. And well, we do have experience on that field, and we were able to assist not only the insurance companies preparing the insurance policy for specific M&A deals, but also we assisted clients, on the seller side or the buyer side, that were under the obligation to have this insurance in place. And it's interesting that we already watched the last part of the movie, because we had an arbitration case where the buyer was seeking for compensation from the insurance company under one of these warranty and indemnity insurances policies, because there was a tax contingency that actually it did occur. And of course, that the buyer said that it was duly, of course, during the due diligence stage, it was a tax that was a risk that was at the report, and the insurance company was saying, but no, it was not at the findings, it was not at a red flag report, and well. Just to give you, of course, the outcome, we were at the seller side and we won the case. So it's, of course, it's a trend in Portugal as well, and I think it's here to stay. And from a tax perspective, it represents, of course, a challenge at all the levels of the DD and the SPA negotiation level. But in terms of case studies from a tax perspective, and I need to focus on one of the most attractive sectors in Portugal, which is the real estate sector, is still very hot and will be as is. I would say, well, from a tax perspective in Portugal, the real estate transfer has a huge cost. Okay, so it can represent 10% of the deal in terms of tax cost, and it was possible to, from a tax perspective, it was possible to structure the deal as a shared deal in order to reduce or mitigate this cost. So, of course, for big M&A transactions that were including real estate, there was this option to have it structured as a shared deal instead of an asset deal. But then the law changed in Portugal, so it's quite the same. We end up with the same result, either if we structure the deal as an asset deal or a shared deal. And because of that, M&A transactions involving real estate in Portugal, they got a little bit more complex, okay? Because we had to, have solutions for our investors. So the complexity is now basically covers situations where SPAs are being used, SPAs benefiting from tax exemptions, but also like shareholders transferring real estate to subsidiaries under the obligation, under the capital payment obligations. But again, we know that new legislation is being prepared, so we will have something new coming in, and definitely, of course, I presume tax authorities are trying to, of course, capture this type of transactions as well. So I believe that in the near future, we will have corporate M&A tax lawyers already getting ready for new solutions to clients and going back to play the cat and mouse game with the Portuguese tax authorities.
So just the last question to close this panel is a business question. We talked before about due diligence, about artificial intelligence. What we are seeing in Italy is that the market, the price on the market, the price of the due diligence are going down and down and down because artificial intelligence, because a lot, first of all, the private equity doesn't want spend too much for the due diligence, and so it's the same also in the other country. It's Netherlands, for instance, France. What's happened? Do you think that we have the firm must, our firm must invest in this activity, I mean, to develop a system of intelligence, artificial intelligence to be on the market, and what do you think?
I would say in France, we have noticed during the, let's say, since 5 years that we don't gain money any longer on due diligences. So we know that the machine can do better what we do. So we have decided within the firm to work with the data room providers, because I was in a conference a few years ago and I was talking to this guy who was selling this data room. I said, what do you do with the data afterwards? He said, what do you mean? I said, you organize, you set up a virtual data room, but what do you do with the data afterwards? And he said, yes, right, we don't do anything. We just, we close the data room and that's it, and you have your report. And I said, why if we think about something together? And this company is based in Frankfurt, and we started with them, and we said, what about if, for example, change of control provision in a contract is just so stupid to try to find out, and sometimes you acquire a commercial center and you ask your juniors just to spend hours and hours on that, and they miss something, and you have in mind, but what is the value for the client? So it was a nice adventure, because we said, okay, we're going to start with you. And he said, I need domestic, let's say domestic contract, not international one, because I need a French version of each of them. So we started with 5 engineers in Frankfurt, which was quite nice. And we needed to feed the machine with our contract in order to find the change of control provision. And we call that the Choco, like chocolate, project. And the challenge, because we have a volume of documents, was to feed the machine on a day-to-day basis. Because what I understood is that the machine is like a baby. You have a spoon, and the baby takes the spoon. The first thing he can, and the day after he forgets. So the spoon is on the floor, and it was exactly the same thing. So we are feeding the machine, and we had to give the different name: change of control, transfer of contract, station, etc., just to cover everything. And after a few months, 6 months, we went there and we were impressed, because we put the contract, one of the contract in the machine, and after 1 second, boom, we had the results. So we said, my God, it's incredible. And then we kept on doing that. And finally, we have this kind of software, because the difficulty for us lawyer, and it's maybe the case in all countries, we are liable for the report, meaning for issuing the report. So we need to be sure that what we use and that we have all the change of control provision. So we using some software. We know that there are some software, Luminance, etc. But there are
Luminance.
Yeah, the thing with Luminance is that it's a super Anglo concept, and they try to translate in different languages an Anglo concept, which that's why we wanted domestic, contract, because if you the translation was not good enough, and some domestic regulation is not reflected in this Anglo environment. That's why it's a bit tricky for us. And finally, the machine can do what we call the deep learning, meaning that in some contracts, we have not seen that there were two change of control provision in different part of the contract. So that was quite interesting, and we learned a lot about the fact that, of course, the machine doesn't think. There's no artificial intelligence. It's just because since, now with what we call the big data plus this technology, we have the possibility to work with the machine on a, let's say, high level and with the volume. But this is not new. It started in 1950. But that's why we call that artificial intelligence. And, people say, don't talk about that. It doesn't work. The machine doesn't think. And just get used to that. So, yeah, of course, just to understand your question, yes, for due diligence, we know that the audit firm are investing huge amounts of money on that. I heard that in Paris, Ernst & Young and Justin, they said as they dedicated more than 50 million on these issues, because this is our core business. And we know that it's not the future, of our practice. So this is what we do, and in more than just legal or due diligence, some law firms are working on having the findings on the due diligence and filing immediately the template, the first draft of the SPA, which is another thing. And some law firms are investing a lot on that in order just to avoid this the first step. So this is where we are here.
Steven, in Netherlands, it's the same.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting to hear your progress on that. We've investigated many solutions offered by the numerous amount of vendors in the market. We haven't found the holy grail for due diligence software yet, but I think it's inevitable to implement that in our business. And the key question is, can small, medium firms fight the big four with their huge investments in that? But it's not only for the client offering, but also for employees. Our junior lawyers get fed up with all that very manual, low quality work in their perception. And they are going to expect to be supported by artificial intelligence going forward. So we need to. But to be frank, we've tested various software packages, but the output is not precise enough. You can't rely on it. It takes too long to learn.
Yes, but it's what Christina said. I mean, also as we bought a program, but of course now we have to invest, require a lot of time, people and so on. It's like really, when she said it's like a baby. It's really in this way. Before to get a good result, you need to invest a lot.
But currently, could you explain how you embed it in your offering to clients already?
I mean, when you see on the market that your offer a due diligence that until 2 years ago was sold for 20,000 euro, and your competitor sell for 5,000, what do you do?
Sure.
So, or you think, okay, I spend much more now. I invest. I ask to my people to learn to use this program and so and so. Or at the end of the day, the risk is to stay out of the market. Also because it's not only the big one of the big four that invest. A lot of firms, at least in Italy, I don't know in the other country, but in Italy it's this. So if you have a firm, if you are a firm medium large size, in my point of view, you cannot avoid to go in that way.
And do you now use it for fishing out the change of controls, or is it a pre-screening in order to
Frankly
establish
speaking,
the
we are
focus?
just started, so we are.
sorry.
So we are. If I have to say something, we are with the spoon in the hand. We are doing this right now. Next year I can update you about the result. Okay, thank you very much to our panelists.
Thank you, Steven.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you, and I hope it's been interesting.